You think you know some stories, but the truth is much darker and deeper, and some people have lived lives worth telling, like him, Caesar, who won victories everywhere, from Spain to the Gaul of barbarian tribes, from northern Europe to the ruthless steppes of Anatolia, from the Nile of Egypt to the wet islands of the Mediterranean. Like Gaius Julius Caesar, Rome is one of the most important states that have existed throughout history and perhaps the one that has left us the most stories to tell. Let's go to the exciting times of Rome. Now, let's go to the exciting times of Rome, and let's be a guest in the life of the most important name of those years. 100 BC, Caesar. He was born in a rich house as the child of a noble family. Beuli, he received a very good education. For the Roman nobles, their children were future statesmen and generals, and great importance was given to the education they would receive in fields such as mathematics and law. However, luck did not go very well for Caesar. As a result of his family's political rivals prevailing, all his assets were confiscated. Many of his relatives were killed, and when his father died suddenly, he had to take over the family at the age of 16. The action in his life will never decrease from this point on. Caesar, who joined the Roman army in Asia at a young age, received oratory training from philosophers during his journey to the Aegean Islands. He was kidnapped by pirates. The pirates asked for 20 talents of gold in return for Caesar. He told them to ask for 50 talents. After he was released, he quickly established a navy. Caesar kept his promise to himself and caught the pirates who kidnapped him. They were crucified in today's Turkey. He was only in his 20s. Yes, there is news from Rome, news of the rebellion. A rebellion started by a gladiator named Spartacus and his friends. Although it is not certain that the young Caesar, who gained fame due to his bravery and success in wars, played a role in the suppression of the rebellion, considering that he was on duty in the Senate at that time. It is highly probable that he was involved in the events. In fact, the Spartacus rebellion was suppressed by the Roman general Crassus and Pompey Magnus, and 6,000 rebels were crucified on the road to Rome without any mercy, showing the bloody face of Rome. During this process, Caesar occasionally acted as a lawyer. While doing his job, he sometimes took on small tasks in the Senate. The Senate of the Roman Republic. Yes, Rome was a republic in those years. There was neither a king nor a tyrant. In the light of philosophers such as Cicero and Cato, who were dedicated to protecting the values of the Republic, there was a Rome that accepted freedom as sacred by religion. Caesar was appointed to Gaul by the Senate in a short time. This constitutes the beginning of the most important process of his life and the first link of our adventure. Gaul is a region that includes today's France and the surroundings of Gaul. There is a dense population full of barbarian warriors and ruthless tribes, and they are really good at military service. It is spooky and dark. On the other side, there is an ambitious Roman, Gaius Julius Caesar, who has only 20,000 soldiers under his command. But he knows very well that if he does not make a good profit by exploiting the debt-ridden Gaul, he will be erased from Roman history. However, he will show that he is a genius in that Gallic campaign, and years later, his name will be remembered together with Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, and Emir Timur. Caesar fought a total of 3 million enemy soldiers in his 8-year Gallic conquests. 1 million of them were killed, and 1 million were sold as slaves. He achieved victory after victory. He defeated 300 tribes and burned 800 cities, but there is a victory here, which is considered one of the most brilliantly won wars in history. The Battle of Alesia. Caesar's army of 40,000 to 60,000 reached 250,000 soldiers, and the battlefield was a huge front spread out over approximately 30 kilometers. Caesar had 16 kilometers of wooden walls built to surround the city of Alesia. He also had another 18-kilometer wooden wall built facing outwards, not towards the city, so they were caught between both the Gallic army inside and the Gallic army outside. Although it seemed like a definite defeat from the outside, this was his plan anyway. The Romans had carried more than 500,000 tons of rubble and soil by human hands and piled up hundreds of thousands of tons of timber for the construction of these walls. In the battle that lasted months, even Caesar himself took part in the clashes with his sword. As a result, 12,000 Roman soldiers died, and the losses of the Gauls were 100,000. In addition, the king of all Gaul was captured. Caesar literally passed through the country, and at the same time, Caesar, who was a good writer, described the events in detail in his book, notes on the Gallic campaign, of course, by making a little propaganda. But Caesar had proven that great victories are not won with numbers, but with intelligence. So much so that the discipline of Caesar's army has greatly influenced today's military. The punishment for soldiers expressing their dissatisfaction, even disobeying orders, was crucifixion. Everything was fair. No discrimination was made. But an army cannot be governed only by punishments. Caesar lives with his soldiers. He eats what they eat and skillfully ensures their loyalty to him. Almost all of his soldiers remained loyal to him until their deaths. The military practices of Rome and ultimately Caesar are interesting, but they also deeply influenced Nazi Germany. The famous Nazi salute made for Hitler is a famous Roman salute used for Roman generals and ultimately for Caesar. Even the ceremonial Nazi army formation and a significant part of the Nazi symbols were inspired by the Romans. The source of this situation was Hitler's admiration for Rome, so much so that Hitler saw himself as a new Caesar and said that there is no work left in history other than pottery for the German people, whom he considered superior. However, the works of the Romans stand tall. Caesar conquered all of Gaul and entered England when bad news followed. His friend Pompey Magnus began to follow him. His beloved daughter, who was married, died while giving birth. Crassus, who was the greatest of all and suppressed the Spartacus rebellion, lost the war against the Parthians in Herat, which is located in today's Turkey, at the same time, and the Parthians executed him by pouring molten gold into his mouth because of his greed for money. In addition, the Roman Senate was disturbed by the wealth and power he had reached in Gaul, which he exploited for 8 years, and recalled him. In order to prevent uncontrolled power, the Roman system was indispensable. There were 2 consuls at the head of the Roman Senate, and the consuls change every year. If one person became powerful enough to upset the balance of the scales, it could lead to tyranny in Rome, and this could lead to the collapse of the state. For this reason, the Senate could recall the generals who became too powerful to keep them under absolute control or appoint someone else instead. According to the Romans' religious belief, the Senate and the Republic were sacred, so the people were absolutely against one person taking over the government. So much so that one of the most important gods of the Roman religion was the goddess of freedom, Libertas. The inspiration for the Statue of Liberty in America was again the goddess Libertas of Rome. In the Republic, the people had the power to veto the decisions of the Senate. Of course, this was a big problem for Caesar. The power he had reached could be significantly taken away from him with the investigations that would be opened about him. He had 2 options. Either he would go to Rome with his army since soldiers were not allowed to enter Rome, and this meant a civil war, or he would come as a civilian. And in this case, he would fight the investigations opened about him. Caesar came to the Rubicon River near Rome with 13 legions. Beyond the Rubicon River, it is only possible to enter as a civilian. Caesar waited for a while, took a step, and made his decision. The target is Rome. While crossing the Rubicon River, he said the famous words, "The die is cast." Now it was the Senate's turn to decide. Either they would stay and fight against Caesar with the few soldiers they had, or they would go out of Rome and form a large army and then come back. The senators and most of the city's people, including Pompey Magnus, known as the conqueror of Spain, left Rome. Caesar entered Rome. The streets were empty. The gangs were killing each other, and there were only a few supporters left. In addition, his mistress is also in our story, Servilia, who was also the mother of Brutus, who had an important place, and some of his relatives were waiting for him in Rome. Meanwhile, the Senate under the command of Pompey Magnus managed to quickly establish a large army. But despite Caesar's small number of soldiers, he managed to defeat the large Roman army. Commander Pompey Magnus fled to Egypt to establish a new army. Cato, a staunch defender of the Republic, and his friends went to North Africa to establish their own army. Caesar knew that the Senate was meaningless in a novel. He also had to get the support of the people, so he made a fuss again and announced that he forgave those who fought against him. Nobles such as Cicero and Brutus surrendered. After Caesar's coup was successful and a significant part of the Senate returned, he declared himself as a temporary dictator. If we say dictatorship, don't perceive it as it is today. In Rome, it is an official title given in times of emergency and has limited powers, but a powerful authority. Our next stop on our journey is Egypt, the country of the pyramids and pharaohs. Things are complicated there. Is there a puppet pharaoh, Ptolemy, a child in his teens, on the throne? In exile, Cleopatra, who was the brother and wife of the pharaoh, was both his sister and his wife. This may sound rightfully scary. However, since the lineage of the Egyptian dynasty was considered divine, members of the dynasty were often married to each other. However, the terrible Caesar, Pompey Magnus, came to Egypt after him. He had only 500 soldiers with him. The Egyptian pharaoh, Little Ptolemy, said that he had a surprise for Caesar. This surprise was Pompey Magnus' head. He was still the consul of Rome. Besides this unforgivable moment, he had only 500 soldiers, and he could be killed by the pharaoh at any moment. He also implemented a clever plan. He had Cleopatra, who was in exile, located and had her kidnapped. According to the story, Cleopatra was brought before Caesar wrapped in a carpet. This was how they first met. Ptolemy was killed as a result of the coup. He was fed to crocodiles in the Nile River, and Cleopatra took her place. During this process, an emotional closeness began between Cleopatra and Caesar. But this was not a simple closeness. Cleopatra could speak 45 languages at an advanced level. She was knowledgeable about ancient Greek philosophy as much as she discussed it with philosophers. She was also knowledgeable about mathematics and astronomy. In addition to being an expert, she also had a good military education. She also knew how to impress a man like Caesar. She had 400 ships accompany her to a party she organized on the Nile River, and Caesar could not help but fall in love with her. Caesar, who stayed in Egypt for a while, this time went to Anatolia. The Pontus state in Anatolia was a great power and began to threaten Rome. A very bloody war took place in today's Tokat province. With Caesar's victory, the last Caesar said his famous words here, Veni, Vidi, Vici, meaning I came, I saw, I conquer. In fact, in 2012, the Zile district municipality of Tokat registered this saying. In addition, the word Vidi, meaning I saw, in the sentence became the source of inspiration for today's word video. The person who masterfully won a series of battles in Anatolia also completely destroyed the giant armies established by other senators in Africa. Honorable Republic defenders like Cato, who led these armies, committed suicide instead of surrendering. Caesar had now managed to establish a definite rule over the entire country. Since he had pardoned the remaining senators, there was no visible opposition against him. In addition, he had also committed corruption and murder. He stopped the people and managed to gain the support of some ordinary Romans by distributing land to them. Caesar was also a staunch pagan who believed in the classical Roman gods. In the victory celebrations he organized, he painted himself in the colors of the god Jupiter and presented himself to the people and sacrificed the king of the entire country of Gaul, which he had held captive for many years, to the gods in religious ceremonies. Although Caesar seemed to be following a positive policy, his increasing power gave the impression that he would turn into a tyrant. The Senate perceived him as a sign of this by having a throne built for him. The fact that he welcomed the senators who came to visit him by sitting down instead of standing was the last straw. In addition, his marriage to Cleopatra angered both the people and his official mistress, Servilia, the most powerful woman in Rome and the mother of Brutus. Roman citizens called Cleopatra the Queen of Kings. Servilia opened the doors of her house for the meetings of the generals and senators who tried to stop Caesar. The pro-republic senators put forward several plans. The decision was that Caesar was stabbed to death by everyone in the middle of the Senate on the Ides of March, 44 BC. A group of senators summoned Caesar to the forum to read a petition asking for his return to power, but the petition was a deception. As Caesar began to read the forged petition, Tullius Cimber, who had presented the petition, pulled down Caesar's tunic. Caesar shouted, "This is an atrocity," as Casca drew his dagger and slit the dictator's throat from side to side. Caesar said, "You traitor, what are you doing?" Casca shouted, "Brothers, help me." At this point, the rest of the group, including Brutus, began to stab Caesar. It is estimated that more than 60 people were involved in the assassination, and Caesar was stabbed 23 times. The dictator of Rome died like this, but Caesar's death did not bring the expected result. The senators had thought that the witness would be wiped out and the republic would be reborn. However, the assassination led to a new and even greater civil war because Caesar's closest general, Marcus Antonius, and his 17-year-old nephew, the philosopher Octavius, did not want to give up power but to pass it on to themselves. Marcus Antonius and Octavius made an alliance against the Senate. The civil war was devastating. Thousands of assassinations were carried out against each other. There were countless battles stretching to the Aegean Islands. The commander of the Senate's armies was the most noble name in Rome. If a person has a garden and a library, what else could a person want? The hands of the famous philosopher Cicero were cut off by Marcus Antonius' men and hung on the Senate's door. When Brutus was defeated, instead of surrendering, he chose to resist alone on the battlefield and died with honor on the battlefield. Most of the Republicans who lost chose suicide. Those who remained behind somehow submitted to Marcus Antonius and young Octavius. Now it will be the turn of Marcus Antonius and Octavius to share power. When Marcus Antonius defeated Octavius, he went to Egypt. A new love had opened the doors. Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra got married as both allies and to crazy lovers. They declared war when they were young, but Octavius, who was a child, managed to defeat them with his genius. Nobody thought that this young man would suddenly appear and become the most powerful person in the world. After the defeat, the two crazy lovers who did not surrender chose suicide. Marcus Antonius committed suicide with his own sword in accordance with military tradition. Cleopatra died by poisoning herself with a snake in accordance with Egyptian religion. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt and tasted death at a young age. When Octavius entered Egypt, he first wanted to see the tomb of Alexander the Great. When they told him that they could show him the tombs of other kings, he said, "I came to see the tomb of a real king, not ordinary men." So what happened to the future of Rome, which became an empire? What happened to Octavius, who took the name Augustus, became the first emperor of Rome, and had a very successful administration process? He was called the philosopher emperor by the people. He ruled the world from a modest home, but after him, many crazy emperors with uncontrolled power came to power. Arrogant men who only thought about themselves. There was no separation of powers. The Senate lost its influence day by day. Yes, friends. In fact, the collapse of Rome began like this. It started with that first step when Caesar crossed the Rubicon River that day.